Arheus has to be one of my favourite branding projects in recent years. They're a dental practice based in Edinburgh, and we wanted to create a rich brand with a heritage feel that played both on the rich history of the city it's located in, and also represented the many years of experience their staff share. But how did we arrive at that beautiful outcome? What was the process? Which design decisions were made? And what were the reasons behind those decisions? Well, I'm going to share a sneak peek at the process behind the scenes and talk you through the project and the key decisions that were made. But before we begin, if you're working on your own branding project and you feel you might benefit from undertaking a process like this one, why not reach out and get in touch? My website's in the video description, so please reach out to see if your project is a good fit. I work with brands globally, so it doesn't matter where you're based. And also, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe so that hopefully you'll get to enjoy future content. So every project begins with initial client discussions and a brief, identifying what we'd like to achieve. And I also share a brand questionnaire that I ask a client to go away and come back with answers to specific questions. So that's what we have here. And that eventually feeds into, once we're ready to begin, a brand strategy proposal and a summary of the research I've performed. So this document serves a dual purpose. It allows me to get up to speed with the client's industry and take a look at the design approach that competitors have used, as well as often a few benchmark inspirational brands, and of course target audience and a look at the type of brands that target audience already associate themselves with. But it also ensures we're aligned on the intended tone, messaging and positioning. So you can see on this page here, we get to check there are no contradictions. So for some elements of tone, have to make a decision. It's almost a sliding scale. You can't have a brand that's both luxurious and economical. That would send mixed messages. So there are exceptions. For example, a brand could be classical but have little modern elements, but I find this really helps to make some decisions visually and create something that's got a strong, clear message rather than contradictory ones. And so that was the case. And then here, although the majority of these messages will come from the client, who of course know their business best, I provide some advice on this. And importantly, we organize these messages into a clear hierarchy. So ideally, a clear primary message for the brand, key messages that support it, and then further supporting messages. And I don't always include this next step, but in some cases it's helpful to actually identify which brand touchpoints will best communicate each of those messages. So some of them you'll see overall tone and branding, but for others there might be something specific, so imagery or written copy, reviews and testimonials. So it's good to establish that we're not expecting a logo to literally convey all these complex messages. No, it's going to resonate and hopefully convey the primary message, but we're going to use the brand identity as a whole to communicate all of these messages. If we're considering something literal or pictorial for the brand, I find this word map is often very helpful. So if you look at imagery, things get very specific very quickly, specific colors, specific details, specific style. When you just look at the words on the page, it's very open to the imagination. And so at this stage in the process, it's quite useful to just think in words and concepts before getting too literal. And then here we aligned on the positioning. So Arheus was to be seen as a very high-end dental practice, fairly exclusive, boutique, so not mainstream, and we wanted the branding to indicate that. It's also important, and at this stage, we look at the client expectations this would create. And this is a little check to ensure that the brand itself will be able to deliver the promises that we're making, and that we're setting client expectations that the actual business is going to be able to satisfy, which was definitely the case here. So only once we're aligned on and happy with the strategy, we come to the creative stages, beginning with initial concepts for primarily the logo. So I like to include a client on this journey. Sometimes designers will just share the final concepts themselves, but I like to actually invite a client to kind of join me for the ride. So I begin by exploring fonts, quite a broad, varied range, and looking back at that strategy and the tone, the messaging we're trying to convey, asking yourself which fonts have the correct personality, the correct attributes to convey that. Then if we're considering quite a literal visual element to the logo, I'll pull examples in. So you can see various examples here. We looked at heraldry used in Scotland, the unicorn, which is the national symbol, thistles, Celtic knots. So any potential visual elements. Looked at famous buildings and architecture here. It might be a good symbol of Edinburgh. We looked at more abstract patterns that just evoke a sense of luxury and royalty. Looked at some specific scroll work and gilding. So lots of visual examples that then feed into the ideas we explore. So at this stage we start combining those elements, type that I felt was appropriate. For this project we even gave AI an opportunity to come up with some ideas. So not the execution, and unfortunately I think AI is some away from being able to do that. But these were some interesting ideas. So the actual brand name, Arheus, is linked to kind of life force. That was part of the meaning in the brand. So not a primary message, but something we considered conveying, and this idea of art meets science. So you've got a kind of tree representing life, and then a visual treatment that would feel Scottish, so working the Celtic knot into that. So this didn't really work, but interesting to be able to explore these kind of concepts quite quickly now using AI tools. A little more exploration, pairing that with brand elements we were considering. We had maybe a badge style logo in mind, so you can see some of the ideas attempting to flesh that out. And then exploring how something maybe a little abstract with just a general regal feeling could work. Focus on the logo type here, and more literal elements considered. So for more complex logos, it's often a case of bringing different elements together. You can see here we actually license some stock elements that we could then draw on and combine to attempt to create something unique. Some more exploration here. So I like to involve the client in this part of the journey to see what I've explored, how it's come together, also to get a sense of what hasn't worked. And I find that's much better than simply showing the end outcome and skipping all this work and exploration that's gone often behind the scenes. So this idea is playing on a bit of an abstract Celtic knot, a lettermark A with some decorative flourishes. It feels quite regal. And that was it for the process document. So this is the other document I share where I actually pick out and shortlist. So you could skip the process document, some clients will. And these are kind of the final ideas as included in the project scope. So it might be 2 to 3 concepts to pick from. And it's a level playing field, no colour added at this stage. They're presented in a similar format, size, and I include some helpful notes at the bottom. So this is perhaps a stage where designers have different approaches, and I quite like to present this and give a client a chance to think about it before we meet up and discuss, or before I ask for feedback. Now, I think the advantage of that is often a client isn't the same demographic as their target audience. So we don't want a knee-jerk reaction, like which logo do you personally like? We're actually trying to put ourselves in our client's shoes, the shoes of our target audience, and make a decision based on their needs and based on what they would want to see. So I find it's easier to do that once you've looked at the logo over a little period of time, maybe a day or so, looked at it with fresh eyes. It can be much easier to be objective. So you'll know from the sneak peek earlier, this was the concept that we selected, that we went ahead with, and we were quite excited about that. So now we come to the development phases, and I'll flick through these at some speed, but you can get an idea of the kind of decisions we're making. I make a little note of points we might want to improve. So interestingly, one of the notes here is no sharp horns. We didn't want the association with, dentists and injections. It turns out I think we were overthinking that. The horns did come back. And in fact, a unicorn without a horn is essentially, you can see here, well, it's just a horse. So then we no longer had that national symbol. But these are the kind of things that we challenge, and we iterate and reiterate and just make sure that the fine details are perfect. We explore some mock-ups along the way to make sure the logo is versatile enough to be used in different situations. Here we even circled back a little just to consider whether we needed those unicorns or whether something a little more abstract would work instead. So as I flick through these pages, I won't talk through all of this, but you get a sense of the kind of scope that we're exploring to make sure the chosen logo, which is the only thing you see at the end of a project, really is the best possible solution. This one here is actually quite nice, but it lacks the meaning, and I think lacks the kind of level of positioning we reached with the selected concept. But really nice, more of a generic lettermark A with some rich detail decorating it. So some pretty strong alternatives explored, but ultimately, if I go on to the next document, this is the version we picked and decided to develop further. So now at this stage, it's about fine-tuning the details. So you can see where some of the elements were initially overlapping a bit clumsily, we're now fine-tuning those and making them work together. So this is where, particularly if you've taken some stock elements, you need to break those apart, you're working with the vectors, and you're really making them unique and ownable to the brand. And always check if you're licensing any stock, that license does enable you to use it as an actual logo or brand mark. The licensing can vary. So we're refining it here. We also considered a simplified version. So in certain use cases, if I go back a page, like this version of the artwork, if you look at the level of detail, you would struggle to do certain things such as gold foil, that level of detail. Depends on the printer. But this version here, we've just given them something tastefully simplified that's going to come out a bit better in certain applications. So sometimes that's necessary, multiple versions of a logo. You can see them side by side here. We then come to build on that cornerstone of the logo. So we consider complementary font pairings. And again, we're thinking of the character, the personality of the font. Does that align with what we want for the brand? We look at how they might work together on the page, whether they really complement each other. And then we come to color exploration. So I won't dwell too long on this, but often color is contextual. So what feelings will a certain combination of colors evoke, or what visuals would it bring to mind? What similar brands, what practical applications? So with the kind of black and white theme you see here, tends to make you think of premium black label brands, high-end fashion, executive cars, and so on. So we then take a palette and actually apply it to these branding elements, create some mock-up pages to get a sense of how this might work together. And colour is quite powerful. It really does affect the overall tone the brand conveys. So it's a powerful element to use for some fine tuning. This palette, we almost went with this palette here. We quite liked the serenity, the kind of tranquility that comes across with these teal colours, and it's elevated by the copper. So sometimes a potential pain point for clients looking for a dental surgery is, feeling nervous. So a brand that feels quite calming, quite serene, we felt that could be an advantage. But ultimately, this was the palette that we went ahead with. So very elevated, luxurious, and sophisticated. It still has an edge of feeling calming and tranquil, but the focus is on indicating this is a very exclusive, high-end practice, and indicating this is going to be, a superior experience. So once a color palette is decided on, the fonts, these different ingredients, we then come to any specific items included in the project scope. So in this case, we considered some business card designs. A few options here were created to choose between. Also a letterhead. So each of these options pulls on the same elements, but they're executed in a slightly different way. And finally, when we've decided on the stationery, any other collateral for the brand, guidelines are created. And I'll flick through this at some pace, but essentially this is like a recipe book for the brand. So it's articulating all of the design decisions we've made. It's explaining how the logo should be used. It gives details on any specific versions we've created. It will give minimum distances just to make sure the logo's used properly. Outlines not only the fonts we've selected and where those can be licensed, but also some examples of the way those should be used and interact together with specifics like sizing and spacing. Of course, the brand color palette, so specific color codes given for each of these. And then finally, I tend to include a few examples of the intended usage. So looking at the end results, the brand mark really identifies Arheus as a heritage brand at a glance. The two unicorns there, the national symbol, the decorative flourishes, they all come together beautifully surrounding that A letter mark. In a style that's very similar to royal crests, to coat of arms. So that's the visual association that we play on. The colour palette works beautifully as well, that navy blue copper combination. Again, we're just ensuring there's an elevated feel and this look of sophistication at a glance. And then we see the benefit of the multiple variations we created of a brand mark. So that can be used as a seal, it can be used on wax stamps, on business cards, websites, and even foil embossed on brochures. Well, I hope this short case study and look at the process behind the scenes was useful to you. Thanks again for watching, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like and subscribe so that hopefully I'll see you again in future content.